Let's talk about some of the new features in version 1.5 of RuneQuilt. One of the features that was missing in the original release was your standard copy, cut, paste menu items. Because RuneQuilt is a little bit different than your standard text editor, I had to make sure that these operations were context aware and worked intelligently based on what's being copied and pasted. So for example, it doesn't make sense to cut values out of a drop-down box, but it does make sense that you should be able to paste a value that exists in that drop-down box. So for example, if I type the word Sally and then I copy that, it does let me paste it in here because it's one of the valid options. But if I pick the word crackling and then copy it, that option is disabled because it's not one of the valid options in this drop down here. And likewise, I can also right click one of these drop downs, click copy, and it'll let me paste that value back in over here. Likewise, I can also take a value in column 0, copy that, and paste it into any of the metadata columns, and vice versa. I can cut a value and then paste that over here. I also rebuilt the theme system, and while I'm at it, I also completely reorganized all the menus. They should be a little bit more logically laid out. Let's go over to File Options. While we're here, I'll go ahead and talk about some other things that are in here. We have this Select All feature or Deselect All. If we go under Display Settings, what I've done is create a full theme system so you can define your own custom colors for the software. And these themes do propagate elegantly through the whole application. If we come over to the help documentation and then go to documentation, there is a section on theme customization. And all these values are documented and they point out which part of the GUI is impacted by each of the different values. Here we can see an example of what a theme looks like as a JSON object, and we can see in the documentation that all these values are documented. The other thing you'll want to do is to make sure that if you do create a custom theme, that you place it inside the themes folder where your application is installed. You can see that here I have default dark.json and default light.json. When the application starts up, it reads this folder and imports any existing JSON files in that folder. Next feature I want to talk about is the tension and continuity engine. There's this special column that you can add to your grid. It's the continuity and tension column. You can add it by going over to grid, add continuity column. And right now it's disabled because I already have that column here, but if I was to delete it, then that option would become enabled again. If I come over to project, manage tag relationships, we have this concept here of subject, context, and state. As you can see here, we have a subject, context, state triplet of char for character, date for date, and lock for location. So let's see how that works. What we do is we specify a triplet here. So we can say that in this scene here, the date is March 5th and the character Sally was in the dungeon. And here we can claim that in this scene, same thing was happening March 5th. The character Sally was in the dungeon, but let's suppose that there's a situation where we've done a lot of writing in between these two scenes and we make the claim much later on that Sally was actually at the tower. So what the continuity engine does is it notices that there's a discontinuity. What we can do is filter down to just where the discontinuity is and see the two scenes that seem to be contradicting each other and resolve it. We can also pop this over to the other side. And we can quickly see where the discontinuity is, and we can say, you know what? I decided that Sally was actually at the tower in both scenes. So now we've resolved that discontinuity, and we can just mark it as resolved. Let's look at another example. So here I have our tag relationship manager, and I'm going to create another triplet. So let's call this one landmass. This one will be here, and this is discovered by. I click apply settings and then close. Then I'm gonna go ahead and mark this column for swap. I'm gonna bring this column over here. And let's say that in this scene, I have a landmass called raw. Covered by a 10 right. Let's say that I do a bunch of writing, and then later on down here I make a claim that the landmass of Tyrol in the year 1497 was discovered by. So we can see that the continuity engine has flagged this as a discontinuity, and I can turn on a filter. I can see exactly which rows in my story are contradicting each other, and then I can fix the contradiction. Mark that as resolved. And there we go. So I can put as many of these triplets as I want in each one of these cells. This is a special column. Its whole purpose is to look for these discontinuities. Another new feature is the tension graph. So in this same column, the continuity and tension column, if we come over to project, manage tag relationships, we can specify the label for our tension. We can call it something else if we wanted to. And all we have to do is specify a tension level from 0 to 10 in any of these cells, and you can specify it anywhere. It can be near the top or at the bottom, as long as you specify it somewhere. And then we come over to view, toggle tension graph, and we can see as the tension rises and falls throughout the story. And the tension will update in real time, so I could change this to a 10 and it'll change in real time. If you try to change it to something above 10, let's say 15, it'll just snap to the value 10, and if you try to specify something below 0, like -5, it just snaps to the value 0. Let's set this back to a 5. So that brings me to the writer's codex. So there's a new feature that I put in here. Go to help, writing codex, and it's got some writing advice that I've compiled. So for example, there's a monomyth and there's a different tension levels. There's a 3-act structure and save the cat. And there's different sections in here that are kind of interesting and fun to explore. Next is the writer's companion. So we saw this a little bit earlier. This panel shows up whenever there's a discontinuity, but there's also the inspiration panel, and we can pop this over the left or the right, and we can shuffle the tips. So that's kind of neat. And last but not least, we have some new grid manipulation features. So we can mark rows for swap. And we can swap the row. We can also grab some of this text and cut to new row above or cut to new row below. That's pretty useful if you decide that a particular section is too large and it needs its own row. Cut to new row above. And finally, we have the global undo engine. So we can undo any of those operations. And we can also replay those operations. One last feature I want to talk about is the new find and replace. So you can come up to edit, find or replace. Let's try find, or we can also just hit Control F. We can look for pretty much any word and jump around to the different instances of that word. And it's nice because no matter where it falls in the grid, the software will jump to that location. And then we can also do Control H to do a find and replace. So let's look for wind and replace that with let's say fire, and it'll replace all instances of that word. Those are all the updates I have for version 1.5 of the software. If you're interested in checking it out, head on over to runequilt.com. Thanks, and see you guys next time.